orders. Business of supply. Opposition motion standing in the name of Mr. Bachrach, Skeena, Bulkley Valley, reducing home heating costs.
Mr. Bachrach, seconded by Mr. Bulris, moves that given that 2023 saw a record fire season due to climate change in which the area burnt was double that of the historic record, and hundreds of thousands of Canadians were evacuated from the homes. Two, Canadians continue to struggle with dramatic increases to the cost of living, while Canada's biggest corporations, including oil and gas corporations, post record profits. Numéro 3, les programmes.
3 federal government programs aimed at supporting energy-efficient retrofits, such as heat pumps, are hard to access, especially for low-income Canadians. 4. Effective climate action must also address the very real affordability concerns of ordinary Canadians. The House call on the government to A. remove the GST from all forms of home heating, B.
Energy retrofits and heat pumps free and easy to access for low-income and middle-class Canadians, regardless of their initial home heating energy source, and C. finance these changes by putting in place a tax on the excess profits of big oil and gas companies. L'honorable député de Skeena Bulkley.
The honourable member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll start by saying I'll be splitting my time with my good friend, the member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Madam Speaker, Canadians right across this country are struggling with the cost of living. They're struggling with the cost of food. They're struggling with the cost of housing. They're struggling with the cost of home heating. And Canadians right across this country in every province and territory also want to see action on climate change. The challenge of our time, an existential challenge that affects all of us, affects our kids, affects future generations. It's not only that we can address these two urgent issues, the issue of affordability and the issue of the climate crisis, at the same time, Madam Speaker, it's that we must address these two emergencies at the same time. And that's why we have brought forward this motion today. Madam Speaker, this motion does 3 things. The first thing it does is that it removes the GST from all forms of home heating. The GST, after all, Madam Speaker, is a conservative tax that was brought in by a former conservative government, and it's being applied to something that, as we've heard many times in this place, is an essential. And unlike the Liberals, who last week surprised everyone with their nakedly political decision to give some people a break in some parts of Canada where they seem to be facing some tough polls, this motion here gives a break to everyone in every province and territory and on all forms of home heating. So this is a pretty simple policy proposal, Madam Speaker. It's a policy proposal that the NDP has put forward again and again, going back to the time of the late Jack Layton. The other thing that this motion does is that it makes it easier for Canadians to choose clean forms of home heating that save them money on their heating bills, especially heat pumps, which right now are transforming the home heating of millions of people around the world. We've seen double-digit increases in the number of people using heat pumps to heat their homes. And here in Canada, we have a lot of work to do. Now, Madam Speaker, the Liberals' current approach to helping Canadians install heat pumps or do eco-energy retrofits of their homes, particularly for low-income people, but for all Canadians, including middle-class Canadians, is deeply flawed. And what we saw last week was we saw them make changes for people mostly in Atlantic Canada who heat with home heating oil that make it dramatically easier to afford these kinds of changes, to improve their housing envelope, to insulate their homes and weather seal, and to install heat pumps. And Madam Speaker, those are the kinds of changes we need to see right across this country for people in every province, and we need to see for all forms of home heating. So where are we when it comes to achieving this government's stated ambition on reducing climate pollution from home heating sources? Well, Madam Speaker, we're far behind. Canada has committed that more than 10% of home heating is going to be done using heat pumps by 2030 in order to achieve what's in the emissions reduction plan. And right now we're at 6%. So by 2030, we need to get to that 10%. And that equates, Madam Speaker, to about 560,000 heat pumps installed across the country. Now, that's 70,000 heat pumps per year. And we had an order paper question where we asked the government, how many heat pumps have they incentivized under their Greener Homes program since it was brought in 2021? We got the numbers back this past March. And how many was it, Madam Speaker? 438 heat pumps, not 70,000, 438. So, of course, granted, Madam Speaker, heat pumps are being installed for other reasons other than the Greener Homes Incentive Program. But what this shows is that, like the 2 billion tree promise, which the Environment Commissioner just told us is not going to meet its goal and has become a tree counting program instead of a tree planting program, like that commitment, this commitment on heat pumps is being broken. Canada is far behind meeting its ambition and realizing the pace of change that we need to see if we're going to tackle this existential crisis. The heat pump program that this government has is far too difficult for people to access. And I want to tell the story of Perry, one of my neighbors in Smithers, BC. Back last June, his natural gas furnace was at the end of its life, and he wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to put in a clean heat pump system that was going to run on a clean BC electricity and was going to save his household money and reduce climate pollution. And so he went out there and he learned about the Greener Homes program. He got an energy advisor to do an audit of his house. He found an installer that was skilled and able to install a heat pump system. He went through all of these steps, Madam Speaker, and it's not a simple procedure. And the installer installed a heat pump system, looked through all the rules and specifications, put in these 2 units, submitted the paperwork to Natural Resources Canada, to the Greener Homes program, and after months of waiting got back the answer that although the outside unit they had installed was on the approved list of equipment, it wasn't approved if used with the inside unit that they had chosen. And the inside unit was also on the list of approved equipment, but get this, Madam Speaker, not in conjunction with the outside unit they had chosen. Like this, you can't make this stuff up, Madam Speaker. And so after months of frustration and appeals to the program to use some common sense, he's put in a heat pump that uses electricity. It cuts his climate pollution down. This is the goal of the program. He's done it, Madam Speaker. And yet the program refused all his appeals and said, no, you're not getting your $5,000 rebate. So what did they do? The installer went and tore out one of the units and put in another unit, which the installer felt was inferior. But now they're definitely both on the list and should be approved. They resubmitted the paperwork. They did another energy audit. And what happened? Well, after 6 months, the program comes back with an email saying, we have closed your account. And so it's been 1.5 years, Madam Speaker, and Perry still hasn't gotten his $5,000 rebate. He's put more time into fighting with this government program. If he paid himself minimum wage, he'd have over $5,000. And it just points out how ridiculous this government's approach is to getting people these systems that are going to save them money. We're going to change that, Madam Speaker. Now, how are we going to pay for this program? How are we going to put heat pumps in low-income houses and modest-income houses across the country? How are we going to help people on low incomes afford insulation and weather sealing so that they can drive down their bills, so they can have an easier-to-afford cost of living, Madam Speaker? And the answer is very simple. We are calling for the imposition of a tax on the excess profits of the oil and gas companies that are making obscene profits, that are making money hand over fist during a climate emergency, that are fueling the climate crisis and making life more unaffordable for Canadians in every province and territory. Now, this is hardly a radical idea, Madam Speaker. This is exactly what the Conservative government in the UK did during the pandemic. They imposed a 25% profits tax on the oil and gas industry in the UK, and they took those revenues and they drove them into affordability measures for ordinary people. Not only that, Madam Speaker, they increased it to 35%. Now, This is an idea whose time has come, and last week we heard from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that if we were only as a country to extend the very modest excess profits tax this government has placed on banks and insurance companies of 15%, if we were to extend that to the oil and gas industry, it would generate $4 billion in revenue. That's revenue that could go into programs like the one we are putting forward today to get heat pumps into low-income Canadians' homes, to help them make their homes more energy efficient with a proper low-income energy efficiency program. That's going to go a long ways, Madam Speaker. And they can afford it because right now the profits that the oil and gas industry is making are eye-watering. I'm going to provide some of the numbers, Madam Speaker. Canadian Natural Resources, $11 billion in profits for 2022. Suncor, $9 billion in profit in 2022. And I'll add, Madam Speaker, that Rich Kruger, their CEO, has said they're going to move away from climate ambition towards making even more money. Cenovus, $6.45 billion in profit in 2022. The total for Canadian oil and gas companies, $38.3 billion. This corporate profit-taking, Madam Speaker, is driving inflation, it's making life less affordable, and it's fueling the climate crisis. It's time they paid for the solutions that Canadians need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the question I have for the member is in regards to the issue of how the NDP see the GST as something that's going to be applied for, let's say, things such as hydro versus gas versus propane. Is it going to be spread across in terms of all of it being classified as heating?
The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for his question. The answer is yes. It would be applied on all or it would be taken off of all forms of home heating, including electricity. This is going to make a substantial difference. It's going to add up to at least what his government has done for people in Atlantic Canada, and it's going to provide cost savings for people right across the country. And that's the goal of this measure. And I would add, Madam Speaker, that I would hope the Parliamentary Secretary could help Perry from Smithers get his $5,000.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member from BC for his approach on this. And it was difficult to see the way that the Liberal NDP government decided to separate Canadians initially on this program, and he claims that this motion will provide equal benefit to all types of heating fuel. But I question the member on why he and his NDP counterparts continue to prop up this corrupt, divisive, and unaccountable Liberal government time after time after time, and yet they bring forward a motion like this on a day like today when they say they're an opposition party and yet they never oppose the government when it comes to things that really matter. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my Conservative colleague. I've enjoyed my time working with him in this place. We've put forward a motion today that would make life more affordable for Canadians right across the country and would have a measurable impact in Canada's fight against climate change. I believe that all of us as opposition parties should not only be in opposition, but in proposition, that we should push for the ideas that make this country better, that help Canadians in their daily lives. And that's what we're doing with this motion, taking the GST off all forms of home heating, making it easier to install heat pumps in homes across the country, and putting an excess profits tax on the oil and gas industry at a time when they're making record profits. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Therese de Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question for my colleague. In Quebec, we heat and light our homes with hydroelectricity. This is a clean energy, and it's renewable as well. So how do you make a distinction in these measures you're proposing for those provinces that use less clean energy sources than the renewable energy sources that Quebec uses, for example.
La députée,
I would ask the member to ensure that she asks her questions through the chair and not through the member, directly to the member.
in Bulkley Valley.
Merci.
Thank you to my colleague for that question.
It's a fair question, and the answer is that we would take the GST off all forms of home heating. Of course, for electricity, people only receive one bill. There's only one power meter on their house, and so essentially this would be taking the GST off all electricity that is used domestically. Madam Speaker, domestic electricity use is also an essential, and it is a cost that Canadians face. This is a way to make life more affordable for them. And for people like in Quebec, like in my colleague's province, that use electricity for home heating, this is going to make a substantial difference in terms of affordability. Thank you.